Okay, so this is topic 6. It's the third part of our framework that we've been looking at. We're looking at how the learning environment can support student formation. We've already thought about the tasks and assessments that students do. We've thought about the people that support those tasks and assessments and the kind of communications that we can use. Now we're just trying to think a bit more about the actual spaces, the actual environments in which students learn. As theological educators, we might not always have impact or control over those spaces. You might just have to use a particular kind of technology. Your college might have a Moodle learning environment and you don't have any impact on how that's formed. But perhaps you're someone who does have some impact in those areas. Perhaps you're someone who's involved in decisions about how to use those online learning environments, in which case some of these things will be particularly interesting to you. Regardless, there are some things that we can do, whatever our role is. When we think about this topic of learning environment, what we're really asking is, what kind of spaces are going to support student formation? And we're talking about both virtual spaces, digital spaces, and real physical spaces. What kind of place does this particular activity need? How does the environment that this activity is taking place in help support formation? What kinds of tools and equipments and resources are going to be needed to be available for students as they try and engage in the tasks we've asked them to? So let's think first about virtual spaces. What are the kinds of things we can do with virtual spaces that will help us achieve our formational goals? Well, as much as possible, it's always good in digital spaces, online spaces, to have good visual design, easy navigability, so that people can find their way around. So we're talking about usability. As much as possible, is your site that students have to use to go for their online learning, is it easy for them to find their way around? Is it relatively pleasant for them to be in? Can they kind of figure out how they get to the things, how they upload their assignments, if they do that, how they find their course materials, that kind of thing. As much as possible also, can our virtual spaces be ones that enable students to connect with each other in a variety of different ways, whether that be synchronously or asynchronously? Do we have online discussion forums? Do we have capacity for Zoom or other things like that? I mentioned way back in an earlier video, one of the things I like to do in terms of thinking about how you structure the online course materials is to use verbs to describe tasks so that we give instructions to students so they know clearly what they're expected to do. That's part of navigability, finding their way around in the online environment, understanding what you as the teacher are expecting them to do, when they need to do it, how they can complete it, and so on. And I also mentioned earlier, using multiple types of media is helpful. As we're all aware, students learn in different ways. One of the things we do with our Ridley online courses is we usually have video lectures, a bit like this, that are in this online Moodle site. As well as providing students with the videos that they can watch, we also provide them with an audio file of the video so that they can download that separately. They can then listen to that perhaps while they're walking the dog, or while they're doing some housework, or while they're on public transport, or whatever. And then we also provide them with a written version of that video. So we've got those 3 different media types that students can choose to use. And interestingly, students use those in different ways. Some students say, I always just watch the videos. Some students say, I never watch the videos, I always listen to the audios. Some students say, I really like to have the video on and the notes in front of me, and then I take my notes as I go along. So students have different learning preferences, and giving them materials in multiple media can be really helpful for those students. Another thing that is really important in online learning and quite challenging for many contexts is providing reliable access to digital readings and resources. Now, this is becoming a little bit easier. There are more open educational resources available. There are more theological books and journals available as digital versions and ebooks and available online. But of course, some of the access to those can be difficult or expensive. And students might not always have access to online capacity to be able to download things or read things. This is always going to be a challenge, I think. But as far as it's possible in your context, try and provide as many digital readings and resources for your students as is possible. I've included in the course materials some suggestions about open educational resources that might be helpful, and you may know of others. It'd be great if we could share those with each other. As I mentioned before, the online learning environment should facilitate and provide lots of opportunities for interaction and communication. So let's not just think about uploading materials, but also think about how we get students to engage with each other in that space or outside that space using different forms of communication. I'll just mention a couple of useful tools that I've used that you might think are helpful in your context as well. There's an online tool called Padlet. It's sort of like an online wall space where people can upload all sorts of media. They can upload a document, a video, an audio file, a picture. They can just write some text, sort of like having a big corkboard sitting on the wall and people stick things on it. It can be really helpful when you're asking students to share ideas about things. It does require students to have access to the internet and to be able to upload things and to be able to view it. But I suggest that you might want to have a look at that. Another one that's also helpful is VoiceThread. And so VoiceThread is a bit like an online discussion forum, except using recorded voices. Again, with VoiceThread, you can upload multiple forms of media, audio files, videos, images, and so on. And VoiceThread is sort of designed so that there's a central image or a central idea that you're asking students to gather around and discuss. So we've used VoiceThread in a number of occasions just as a bit of variety instead of an online discussion forum where students are always just typing their responses and they don't get to see and hear each other. VoiceThread enables them to at least hear each other. They record their response to a question or another student's comments, and then they can be listened to relatively easily. VoiceThread can be used for free, and as can Padlet, and like most things these days, there's also a subscription mode that you can use if you decide to use them more frequently. There are also a bunch of other tools and resources out there that are useful for reflective practice. So thinking of e-portfolios, which enable students to create a portfolio of their experiences and practices over a period of time. So they can be really helpful for tracing a student's learning and formational journey over a long period of time. Most of those, unfortunately, do cost money. Again, if you've found a good e-portfolio tool that is inexpensive or even free, please share it in the online forum. Here at Ridley, we encourage our students to use the Bible software package, Logos. And that's not always possible. But one of the things we try and do is make sure that we offer resources and support for students in using that Bible software package, in learning how to use all its capacities. That's something to keep in mind, that whenever we add educational tools or technological tools, we need to make sure that we help students learn how to use them, provide resources for students in doing so. Fortunately, most of the software developers these days and software sellers provide their own resources to help you learn how to use them. So you can just point students to those. So that's just a few tips about virtual spaces and how we might think about how we can use those to support students in their formation. In terms of physical spaces, we're talking about the external environment primarily, the students' context in which they live and work, which I've mentioned several times during this course. I've also mentioned previously how the things that we can do to help formation in those contexts are things like building partnership with other people in those contexts, finding places where students can be supervised in ministry practice or practice their skills in their existing Christian congregation. Places and people where students can be receiving feedback and where students can be receiving networking and support with others in external contexts. Of course, that will vary from place to place, and that will be up to you to work out what's appropriate in your context. There's probably plenty more that could be said about the spaces and places, but there's a few starting thoughts for you to consider as you think about how you might use those spaces to support student formation. And there's a learning task in your learning materials to encourage you to think about that also.